Music legend Ozzy Osbourne has died. Osbourne, as you know, pioneered heavy metal.
If there's one name that defines chaos, resilience, and pure rock and roll insanity, it's Ozzy Osbourne, a man who clawed his way out of the depths, not just of music, but of his own self-destruction. A life filled with tragedy, addiction, and near-death experiences, from a bullied schoolboy in Birmingham, ridiculed for his dyslexia, to the frontman of a band that birthed heavy metal, to a solo legend who defied all odds, Ozzy has lived a life few could survive. He's been exiled, broken, and left for dead. But he never stopped. How does someone stare death in the face and laugh? This is the story of a man who should have burned out long ago. This is the story of Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness. John Michael Osborne came into the world on December 3, 1948, in the industrial heart of Birmingham, England. Born into a cramped house in the working-class district of Aston, he was just one of 6 children in a family that struggled to make ends meet. His father toiled away in a factory, his mother worked long hours on an assembly line, and money was always tight. Arguments filled the house, tension was constant, and young John, who would later become Ozzy, felt like an outsider even in his own home. From the start, school was a nightmare. Reading was impossible. Numbers were a blur, and no one had the patience to understand why. Dyslexia wasn't something people recognized in the 1950s. It was just seen as stupidity. Teachers labeled him a failure, his parents lost hope, and classmates saw an easy target. The bullying was relentless. Every day, he was pushed, mocked, humiliated. 2 older boys took particular joy in tormenting him, cornering him after school, making him the punchline of their cruelty. No one helped. No one stopped it. It was just the way things were. At home, there was no comfort. His father, already hardened by the pressures of poverty, had no tolerance for weakness. When Ozzy cried out for help, he was met with a belt or a hard slap. Problems weren't discussed in his household. They were beaten out of view. The hopelessness grew, and by the time he was 14, it became unbearable. One afternoon, alone in his tiny bedroom, he grabbed a rope, tied a knot, and tried to hang himself. As his vision blurred, the door burst open. His father had caught him just in time. But instead of comfort, instead of asking why, instead of trying to understand, his father beat him for it. That was the lesson. Pain didn't get sympathy. It got punishment. After that, something inside Ozzy changed. He stopped caring, stopped trying. He knew school wasn't for him, so he quit at 15, walking away from a future that never seemed possible anyway. The world had written him off, and he had no direction, no qualifications, and no plan. His options were grim: hard labor or crime. He bounced between factory jobs, working with machines he didn't understand, painting houses, even gutting animals in a slaughterhouse. Nothing fit, nothing lasted. He was constantly fired for being careless, for making mistakes, for simply not giving a damn. With no steady income and no prospects, he turned to crime. It wasn't some grand scheme. It was desperation. He needed money, and stealing seemed like the fastest way to get it. But Ozzy was never a mastermind. He got caught almost immediately trying to rob a clothing store. With no money to pay the fine, he was sentenced to 6 weeks in prison. At just 17, he found himself locked in a cold, dark cell, surrounded by real criminals, men who had done far worse than shoplifting. That's when it hit him. If he kept going down this road, he'd end up dead or spending his life behind bars. But there was one thing that had always made him feel alive: music. From the first moment he heard the Beatles' "She Loves You," it was like a lightning bolt, straight to his soul. For the first time, he saw a way out. Not with his fists, not with crime, but with music. He didn't know how to play an instrument. He had no formal training, but he knew, deep in his bones, that this was his path. So when he got out of prison, he made a decision. He wasn't going to die as a nobody. He was going to become a singer. He had no idea how to start, no connections, no plan. But he had a fire inside him that nothing could put out. And that fire led him to something that would change his life forever. A tiny ad in a newspaper, looking for a vocalist for a rock band. It was a long shot, but Ozzy took it. And that one decision, that one phone call, set him on a path that would take him from the cold streets of Birmingham to the heights of rock and roll history. In 1968, a lanky kid with an unusual voice and a battered PA system walked into a dingy rehearsal room in Birmingham. His name was John Michael Osbourne, but everyone knew him as Ozzy. He had no formal training, no musical education, just a desperate need to prove himself. Inside that room, he met three other misfits: Tony Iommi, a guitarist who had lost 2 fingertips in an industrial accident but refused to quit; Geezer Butler, a bassist with a fascination for the occult; and Bill Ward, a powerhouse drummer. They weren't polished, they weren't refined, but they had something different, something dark, heavy, and raw. At first, they called themselves Earth, playing blues-influenced rock like every other band at the time. But one day, while practicing across from a cinema, they noticed a long line of people waiting to see a horror film, Black Sabbath, starring Boris Karloff. That's when it hit them. People were drawn to fear, to the unknown, to the sinister. What if music could tap into that same energy? They changed their name to Black Sabbath and started writing songs that felt more like ominous rituals than radio-friendly rock tunes. Their music wasn't about love and peace. It was about darkness, paranoia, and the feeling that something terrifying was lurking just out of sight. The turning point came in 1970 with the release of their self-titled debut album. The opening track, Black Sabbath, began with the sound of rain, a distant bell tolling, and then 3 of the most ominous, spine-chilling notes ever played on a guitar. When Ozzy's voice cut through with the words, "What is this that stands before me?" Logically, it was unlike anything the world had ever heard. It was slow, heavy, and almost suffocating in its intensity. Critics despised it, calling it crude, ugly, and even satanic. But the fans? They couldn't get enough. Just months later, they released Paranoid, and that was it. Heavy metal had been born. The title track, written in just 20 minutes as album filler, became one of the most iconic rock songs of all time. War Pigs was an explosive, anti-war anthem. Iron Man delivered one of the most legendary guitar riffs in history. And the entire album cemented Black Sabbath as pioneers of a sound no one had a name for yet. It was loud, menacing, and unapologetic. Music for the outcasts, the rebels, the ones who didn't fit in anywhere else. While critics continued to sneer, fans packed arenas. Black Sabbath was no longer just a band, they were a force. Album after album, they kept pushing boundaries. Master of Reality introduced sludgy, down-tuned guitars that would influence generations of metal bands. Volume 4 was a chaotic mix of brilliance and excess. Sabbath Bloody Sabbath proved they could evolve while keeping their signature heaviness. They weren't just surviving, they were dominating. But behind the scenes, Ozzy was slipping further into chaos. At first, the entire band indulged in the rock and roll lifestyle. Drugs, booze, and endless parties were just part of the job. But while the others could still function, Ozzy went all in. He drank from morning to night, snorted anything put in front of him, and spent most of his time in a hazy, unpredictable state. At first, it was wild fun. Then, it became a problem. Then, it became impossible to ignore. He started showing up late to rehearsals, if he showed up at all. When he did, he was either too wasted to perform or so erratic that recording sessions turned into disasters. He forgot lyrics on stage, his voice wavered, and tensions between him and Tony Iommi, once his closest ally, kept getting worse. The band was evolving musically, experimenting with new sounds, but Ozzy was stuck in his own world, lost in a cycle of self-destruction. By 1979, it was clear. Something had to change. The decision wasn't easy, but it was unavoidable. Tony, Geezer, and Bill sat Ozzy down and told him he was out, fired from the band he had helped create. For Ozzy, it was more than a career-ending moment. It felt like a death sentence. Black Sabbath had been his entire life, his salvation, the only thing that had ever made sense. And now, it was gone. Left alone with nothing but his addictions and regrets, Ozzy spiraled even further. He locked himself in a hotel room, drinking himself into oblivion, convinced that this was it. His story was over. But it wasn't. Because Ozzy Osbourne wasn't meant to fade away. And in the darkest moment of his life, a new chapter was about to begin, one that would turn him into something even greater. In 1979, the unthinkable happened. The band that he had helped build, the band that had given him purpose, the band that had taken him from the gutters of Birmingham to the heights of rock and roll, had turned its back on him. Black Sabbath had enough. Ozzy wasn't just unreliable, he was out of control. He showed up wasted, forgot lyrics, missed rehearsals, and when he was there, he was either too drunk to perform or too volatile to be around. Tony Iommi, once his closest friend, delivered the final blow. Ozzy was out. He didn't fight it. He didn't argue. In a way, he had seen it coming. But when the door closed behind him, the reality hit hard. He locked himself away in a Los Angeles hotel room, surrounded by nothing but bottles, pills, and the crushing weight of failure. Days turned into weeks. His only company was self-destruction. There was no plan, no future. He had spent his entire life proving people wrong. But now he believed them. Maybe he really was just a washed-up drunk. Maybe he really was finished. But fate had other plans. Enter Sharon Arden, the daughter of Black Sabbath's former manager, Don Arden. She had seen Ozzy's rise, and she had seen his fall. But more importantly, she saw something even he didn't. He wasn't done yet. Where others saw a lost cause, she saw potential. She refused to let him disappear into the abyss. At first, Ozzy didn't believe her. He didn't believe in anything anymore. But Sharon wasn't the kind of person who took no for an answer. She dragged him out of his hotel room, forced him to sober up, and told him, "You don't need Black Sabbath. You were the magic in that band. You can do this on your own." It was a wild idea. Ozzy had never written music without Sabbath. He wasn't a guitarist. He wasn't a composer. He was a frontman. But Sharon wasn't just trying to get him back on his feet. She was ready to rebuild him from the ground up. And the first step? Finding the right musicians. That's when he met Randy Rhoads. Randy was young, disciplined, and ridiculously talented. His guitar playing wasn't just good, it was electrifying. A mix of classical precision and blistering speed, he could take the chaos in Ozzy's head and turn it into something extraordinary. The first time Ozzy heard him play, he thought he was hallucinating. He had never heard anything like it before. And in that moment, something inside him woke up. For the first time in months, he felt alive again. Together, they started working on new music. And the result? Blizzard of Oz, released in 1980. This wasn't just an album, it was a statement, a declaration that Ozzy Osbourne wasn't just the guy who got kicked out of Black Sabbath. He was something bigger, something different. The album was a masterpiece. Crazy Train became an instant anthem, with Randy's unforgettable riff and Ozzy's haunting wails. Mr. Crowley was eerie, theatrical, and powerful. Track after track, it proved that Ozzy wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. Critics were stunned. No one had expected a man written off as a drunken mess to come back stronger than ever. But Ozzy and Randy weren't done. Just a year later, they released Diary of a Madman, pushing heavy metal to new heights. It was official. Ozzy Osbourne had been reborn, but his past hadn't disappeared. The demons were still there, lurking, waiting, and soon tragedy would strike, threatening to take it all away again. But for now, for the first time in a long time, Ozzy had something he thought he had lost forever: hope. Ozzy Osbourne wasn't just back, he was bigger than ever. Blizzard of Oz had been a triumph, but it was just the beginning. In 1981, he and Randy Rhoads delivered Diary of a Madman, an album that took everything they had built and pushed it further. The compositions were more intricate, the riffs sharper, the energy undeniable. Tracks like Over the Mountain and Flying High Again solidified Ozzy's place at the forefront of heavy metal. He wasn't just the guy from Black Sabbath anymore. He was his own legend. But with success came chaos. Ozzy was always unpredictable, but now he was something else entirely. He didn't just break the rules, he didn't acknowledge their existence. Every concert, every public appearance was a new level of madness. And then came the moment that would forever define his wild reputation. January 20th, 1982, Des Moines, Iowa. Thousands of fans packed into the auditorium, waiting for the Prince of Darkness to take the stage. Midway through the set, something unexpected happened. A fan threw what looked like a rubber bat onto the stage. Ozzy, always the showman, picked it up, held it above his head, and bit down. The moment his teeth sank in, he knew he had made a mistake. It wasn't rubber. It was real. The taste of blood filled his mouth as the crowd erupted into shock and awe. Security rushed him off stage, and he was immediately taken to a hospital for rabies shots, painful injections straight into his stomach. But instead of ruining his career, the stunt became legendary. Ozzy wasn't just a rock star, he was a myth, a creature of pure insanity. The world couldn't look away. But just 2 months later, that same world would come crashing down. March 19th, 1982. A tour stop in Leesburg, Florida. The band had been on the road for months, exhausted but ready to press on. The morning started like any other, until it didn't. The group had stopped at a property owned by their tour bus driver, Andrew Aycock. There was a small, single-engine plane nearby, and Aycock, who had once been a pilot, decided to take it for a spin. It was supposed to be harmless fun, a quick flyover, a moment of excitement before another long day of travel. Randy Rhoads, the young guitar prodigy who had given Ozzy a second chance, climbed aboard, along with makeup artist Rachel Youngblood. Ozzy and the rest of the band watched from the ground as the plane lifted into the sky. Acock, showing off, began flying dangerously low over the tour bus, again and again. The third pass was different. A wing clipped the vehicle. The plane spun out of control, crashing into a house nearby. A fireball erupted on impact. Randy Rhoads was gone. He was only 25. Ozzy ran toward the wreckage, screaming, desperate, unable to believe what he was seeing. Just hours earlier, they had been laughing, planning for the future. Now, his best friend, his musical soulmate, was gone. The man who had saved his career, given him hope, and reminded him why he loved music, was nothing more than ashes in the flames. Ozzy was shattered. He locked himself in his room, drowning in grief, unable to function. He didn't want to eat, didn't want to speak, didn't want to exist. Losing Randy wasn't just losing a bandmate, it was losing the person who had held him together when everything else was falling apart. For weeks, he refused to go on, but Sharon refused to let him disappear. Through sheer force of will, she pulled him back, got him on his feet, and pushed him back onto the stage. It wasn't the same. It would never be the same. But Ozzy did what he had always done. He kept going. Through the pain, through the loss, through the endless cycle of self-destruction. He released more albums, played bigger shows, and built an even greater legacy. But no amount of success could stop the chaos inside him. By the late 80s, his addictions were worse than ever. The drinking, the drugs, the wild behavior, it was a constant downward spiral. Sharon had been his anchor, his savior, but even she had limits. And one night in 1989, he crossed a line that even she couldn't ignore. Blacked out from alcohol, barely conscious of reality, Ozzy turned to Sharon and whispered words that would haunt them both. "We've decided. You have to die." Before she could react, he lunged, wrapping his hands around her throat, strangling her. She struggled, gasping for air, her vision fading. And then, just in time, security burst in, dragging Ozzy away before he could finish what he had started. The police arrived, arresting him immediately. When he woke up in a jail cell, he had no memory of what he had done. No recollection of the moment he had nearly killed the one person who had saved his life over and over again. The court ordered him into rehab. It wasn't just about saving his career, it was about saving his life. For Ozzy, this wasn't just another rock star scandal. It was a breaking point. If he didn't change, he wouldn't survive. But even after all of this, the story wasn't over. Because Ozzy Osbourne wasn't done fighting yet. And the legend of the Prince of Darkness was far from finished. Being a rock star isn't just about the music. It's about the price you pay for it. And for Ozzy Osbourne, that price has been higher than most could ever endure. Fame came with fortune, but it also brought lawsuits, near-death experiences, and a body that's been battered beyond recognition. Yet somehow, through it all, he's still standing. In 1984, Ozzy found himself at the center of a firestorm. Suicide Solution, a track from his debut solo album, was meant to be a warning about the dangers of alcohol abuse. But when a 19-year-old named John Daniel McCollum tragically took his own life after reportedly listening to the song, His family blamed Ozzy. They took him to court, claiming the song contained subliminal messages encouraging suicide. The media latched onto the controversy, painting him as a dangerous influence, a corrupter of youth. But Ozzy fought back. He insisted there was never any hidden message, only a brutal truth about addiction. The case was eventually dismissed, but it left a permanent stain on his career. Legal battles were one thing, physical survival was another. Fast forward to 2003. Ozzy was no longer the reckless young madman of the 80s, but the chaos never truly left him. On a cold December day, he decided to take a quad bike for a ride around his estate. It should have been harmless fun. Instead, it nearly killed him. The vehicle flipped, slamming his body into the ground. His collarbone shattered. 8 ribs fractured. His cervical vertebrae were crushed. He stopped breathing twice. By the time paramedics arrived, he was barely clinging to life. Rushed into emergency surgery, he spent 8 days in a coma, hovering between life and death. When he woke up, his body was unrecognizable, weak, broken, and scarred. He had to learn how to walk again, to rebuild his strength from nothing. It was one of the closest calls of his life, but it wouldn't be the last. Years later, in 2019, disaster struck again. While recovering from surgery, Ozzy suffered a brutal fall in his home. Metal rods that had been implanted in his spine after the quad bike accident were dislodged, causing severe nerve damage. The pain was excruciating, the kind that doesn't fade. Once again, he was back in the hospital, fighting to regain control over his own body. Tours were canceled. His future in music was suddenly uncertain, but nothing could prepare him for what came next. That same year, doctors gave him the diagnosis that would change everything: Parkinson's disease, a slow, cruel disease that strips away movement, strength, and independence. For a man who had spent his life commanding the stage, throwing himself into performances, and feeding off the energy of the crowd, this was a nightmare. His hands shook. His legs gave out. The chronic pain never stopped. And yet, even as his body betrayed him, his spirit refused to break. He kept recording, kept creating, kept pushing forward. He didn't hide from the truth. He faced it head-on. In an emotional interview, he admitted, "It's been the most miserable time of my life. I don't feel like the same man anymore." But then, in classic Ozzy fashion, he laughed. "But I'm still here, and I'm not done yet." And that's the thing about Ozzy Osbourne. No matter how many times he's been knocked down, no matter how many doctors have warned him, no matter how many times the world has expected him to fade away, he refuses. Even as his health declines, even as the pain takes its toll, he won't go quietly. Because Ozzy Osbourne is more than a rock star, more than a survivor. He's the man who simply refuses to die. Ozzy Osbourne didn't just change music, he helped create an entire genre. Without Black Sabbath, there would be no heavy metal, no Metallica, no Iron Maiden, no Pantera. The sound that defined rebellion, darkness, and raw power started with 4 young musicians in Birmingham. And at the heart of it all was Ozzy. His voice, his presence, his sheer unpredictability turned Black Sabbath from a band into a movement. But what makes Ozzy truly unique is that he didn't just stop with Sabbath. His solo career redefined what it meant to be a heavy metal frontman. He wasn't just another musician, he became an icon, a symbol of chaos and survival. He took risks, broke rules, and set a new standard for what a rock star could be. Decades later, his influence still echoes through generations of artists who grew up idolizing him. And then, in the most unexpected twist of all, he became a household name in a way no one could have predicted. In the early 2000s, the Osbournes' reality show transformed the Prince of Darkness into something entirely new: a father, a husband, and a source of pure, unfiltered comedy. Fans who once saw him as an untouchable rock god now saw him struggling to work the remote, arguing with his kids, and mumbling through everyday life. It was chaotic, it was hilarious, and it made Ozzy more famous than ever. He wasn't just the wild man who bit the head off a bat. He was a global phenomenon. Even after all the decades, all the highs and lows, the world still hadn't had enough of Ozzy Osbourne. And in 2024, the industry finally gave him the recognition he had earned over a lifetime of defying the odds. That year, Ozzy was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for the second time, first for Black Sabbath, and now for his legendary solo career. The man who had once been written off as a drunken failure was now celebrated as one of the greatest to ever step on a stage. But even as the awards rolled in, even as he and Sharon continued their podcast, The Osbournes, where fans got an unfiltered look into their lives, one thing remained unfinished. There was still one last moment Ozzy needed before it was all over. And that moment was set for July 5th, 2025. For one final time, Ozzy Osbourne will take the stage with the original members of Black Sabbath, reuniting in Birmingham, the city where it all began. Back to the Beginning will be more than just a concert. It will be history, a farewell, a testament to everything Ozzy has fought for, everything he has survived, and everything he has given to the world of music. It won't just be Sabbath. The biggest names in metal, Metallica, Slayer, Pantera, will be there, all to pay tribute to the man who paved the way for them all. And in true Ozzy fashion, it won't be about money. Every penny will go to charity, Cure Parkinson's, Birmingham Children's Hospital, and Acorn Children's Hospice. Because even after all the insanity, all the destruction, and all the madness, Ozzy has always had a heart. He has been written off more times than anyone can count. He has survived addiction, near-death experiences, lawsuits, and a disease that is slowly taking his body away from him. But through it all, he's never lost his spirit. He's fought the industry, fought himself, fought the demons that tried to take him down. And now, as he steps onto the stage one last time, it won't be a goodbye. It will be a reminder. Ozzy Osbourne isn't just a musician. He isn't just a survivor. He is a legend, and legends never die. Ozzy Osbourne's story isn't just about music. It's about survival. It's about a man who has lived on the edge of destruction and somehow, time and time again, found a way back. He's battled addiction, faced death more times than anyone can count, been cast out of the band he helped build, and lost some of the people he loved most. And yet, he never stopped. From a bullied kid in Birmingham with no direction, to a pioneer of heavy metal, to a global icon, his life has been a roller coaster of chaos, genius, and resilience. He's been underestimated, dismissed, and told he wouldn't make it. But every time the world counted him out, he proved them wrong. He redefined heavy metal, reshaped rock and roll, and built a legacy that will outlive us all. And now, as he prepares for his final farewell, his impact is undeniable. Without Ozzy, there is no heavy metal as we know it. No Black Sabbath, no Crazy Train, no blueprint for the rebellious, untamed energy that fuels rock music today. His influence runs through every power chord, every head-banging anthem, every band that dared to be louder, darker, and bolder. But beyond the music, Ozzy's story is a testament to something even greater: the human spirit. The ability to rise after every fall, to fight when the world tells you you're finished, to live with no apologies, no regrets, and no fear. So, what do you think of Ozzy's incredible journey? His highs, his lows, his legacy? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and let's celebrate the legend together. On July 22nd, 2025, the world learned that Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness, the voice of Black Sabbath, the man who turned chaos into art, had died at age 76. But as fans mourned, something strange began to unfold. Within hours, old interviews began resurfacing, particularly one where Sharon Osbourne said she and Ozzy had a secret pact, a chilling agreement to go to Dignitas, the assisted suicide clinic in Switzerland, if their health declined. Sharon once said, "If Ozzy or I ever got Alzheimer's, that's it. We'd be off." Was it just shock value talk? Or something more? Now, decades after those words were spoken, and days after Ozzy's passing, the world is asking a question no one ever expected. Did Sharon Osbourne just reveal how Ozzy actually died? Or was this something that had been planned all along? And if so, what else don't we know about the final days of rock's most unpredictable icon? The origin of the Osbourne death pact wasn't internet folklore. It came straight from Sharon herself. In her 2007 memoir, Survivor: My Story, The Next Chapter, she wrote with unsettling clarity about a conversation she and Ozzy had after watching her father, Don Arden, slip away into the slow erasure of Alzheimer's disease. Sharon described feeling helpless, watching a man once so sharp become unrecognizable. That experience, she said, haunted me so badly I swore I would never let it happen to us. So she and Ozzy made a pact. If either of them developed a degenerative brain condition, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, they would go to Switzerland, to a facility called Dignitas, where assisted suicide was legal and regulated. Sharon claimed they had drawn up plans and even spoken with representatives. At the time, the idea seemed shocking, almost outrageous. But Sharon wasn't joking. She stood by it in multiple interviews. In a 2007 Daily Mirror article, she said, "If Ozzy or I ever got Alzheimer's, that's it. We'd be off." That line became infamous. And years later, when Ozzy's Parkinson's diagnosis was made public, people began to quietly revisit those old comments. Parkinson's isn't Alzheimer's, but it affects the brain. It affects memory. It affects personality. And over time, it can rob a person of who they used to be. So when Sharon said she and Ozzy would consider euthanasia if their minds began to go, well, how close had they actually come to that reality? In the years after the memoir, the conversation faded. It was treated like a strange footnote in the long, wild story of the Osbournes. But after Ozzy's death in 2025, that quote came roaring back. Fans dug it up. News outlets reshared it. Podcasters analyzed it. What had once seemed like a quirky, dark moment now felt like a possible roadmap. Because if Sharon and Ozzy had really planned this, what made July 22nd the final date? Had Ozzy's health reached a breaking point? Had the pain, physical, mental, spiritual, become too much? Or had a decades-old promise finally been fulfilled in silence, while the world watched from the outside? As the mystery began to grow, one thing became certain. Sharon had once spoken about death with chilling certainty, and now that Ozzy was gone, people weren't just remembering her words, they were starting to believe them. The eerie thing about the Osbourne family is that they never really kept secrets, at least not in the traditional sense. They broadcasted their lives, their pain, their dysfunction, their humor. But sometimes the truth hides in plain sight. That was exactly the case during a 2023 episode of the Osbournes podcast, when the family, Sharon, Ozzy, Jack, and Kelly, sat around the mic for what seemed like another casual, unscripted moment. But then, out of nowhere, the conversation veered back into something darker, something that hadn't been brought up in years. Jack Osbourne asked his mother point blank, "Do we still have the plan to go to Switzerland?" The room went quiet for a second, and then Sharon, without missing a beat, replied, "Well, maybe. Isn't life already suffering?" The mood shifted. Jack chuckled nervously. Kelly looked visibly uncomfortable. But Sharon wasn't finished. "Yes, we all are. But I don't want it to actually hurt as well," she added. "Mental suffering is enough pain without physical. So, if you've got mental and physical, see ya." Ozzy was present during that conversation. He didn't speak much, just nodded in quiet agreement. But his presence, his silence, and his frail appearance said more than words ever could. Fans who later rewatched that moment in 2025 saw it through a new lens. It no longer looked like morbid humor. It looked like foreshadowing. For decades, Ozzy had been the wild man of rock, biting heads off bats, cursing on live TV, stumbling through hotels. But in this moment, he was something far more haunting, a man possibly preparing his audience for an exit. At the time, most people dismissed the moment. "That's just Sharon being Sharon," they said. "That's Ozzy's dark humor." But what if it wasn't? What if that moment was a soft launch for a truth they couldn't say out loud? What if the podcast, watched by millions, was a warning in disguise? Looking back, that exchange now feels like a cryptic goodbye, a nod to a secret agreement that was drawing closer to fulfillment. And if Ozzy's death wasn't entirely natural, if there was an element of control, of choice, of timing, then maybe this podcast was their way of easing the world into it. Because sometimes the loudest confessions don't come from silence. They come from laughter that doesn't quite sound right. Just 11 days before Ozzy Osbourne's death, the family's carefully constructed wall of mystery started to show cracks. And it came from someone who hadn't spoken much on the topic before, Kelly Osbourne. On July 11, 2025, Kelly took to Instagram with a fiery story, lashing out at what she described as insane lies circulating about her parents. The internet was ablaze with speculation about a so-called suicide pact, dredging up old quotes and podcast clips. And Kelly had had enough. "Stop making articles or posts about how you think my parents are having a suicide pact," she wrote. "That was bulls. My mom said to get attention one time, and my dad's not dying. Stop." Her tone was raw, defensive, maybe even panicked. She went on to attack the growing number of AI-generated videos portraying Ozzy as frail or on his deathbed. "Yes, he has Parkinson's," she admitted. "And yes, his mobility is completely different than it used to be. But he's not dying. What is wrong with you?" To many, Kelly's outburst seemed like a protective daughter finally drawing a line. But to others, it did the exact opposite. Why deny something so specific? Why mention the suicide pact at all? And why now, just days before Ozzy's passing? The timing was too suspicious. Had Kelly gotten word that her father was nearing the end? Had she been told to help downplay the whispers in advance? Or was she truly in the dark, trying to make sense of a situation that was unfolding faster than any of them could process? There were other clues, too. During those final weeks, Sharon Osbourne went unusually quiet on social media. Jack, normally active, posted nothing. Ozzy's official accounts shared no updates, no throwbacks, no "he's resting" statements. It was as if the entire family went into silent mode, while Kelly was left shouting into the void. Some fans believed Kelly's reaction was emotional, the kind that only comes from a daughter trying to protect her father's dignity. But others believed it was a strategic move, a PR barrier being thrown up before the real storm hit. Her denial didn't stop the rumors. In fact, it fueled them. Because when someone rushes to tell you something isn't true, especially something that's barely made it into the mainstream, it only makes you ask, why are they so afraid of people believing it, and what don't they want us to know about what was coming next? In the months leading up to Ozzy Osbourne's death, something quietly shifted. And not just in his health. Longtime fans, journalists, and even former bandmates began to notice what they called a dimming of the light. Ozzy, once a larger-than-life rock titan who defied death for decades, had started to slowly disappear from public view. No new concert appearances, no spontaneous social media cameos, just carefully curated family updates and a growing silence that felt heavy with unspoken truth. Ozzy had battled Parkinson's disease since at least 2003, though the public only learned about it much later. By 2020, he was dealing with severe spinal issues, tremors, and the aftershocks of multiple surgeries. Sharon once revealed he had over 15 screws in his neck and back, joking that he could set off a metal detector from across the room. But the joke wore thin. The pain was constant. The tremors worsened. The Osbourne family tried to keep spirits high, but the weight was showing. On Ozzy's face, in Sharon's tone, in the carefully controlled interviews that revealed little but hinted at everything. Ozzy made several attempts to return to the stage, each one more heartbreaking than the last. He was forced to cancel his long-awaited farewell tour, then another, and another. In one video from late 2024, Ozzy is seen gripping a cane with both hands, his eyes distant, his smile faint. Fans noticed. He looks tired, some wrote. He doesn't look like himself, others said. But it wasn't just physical. Those closest to him reported moments of confusion, of forgetting lyrics, of drifting into long silences. His spirit, once unkillable, seemed surrendered, and those who had followed the Osbourne journey since the days of the Osbournes' reality show could see it plain as day. Ozzy was retreating step by step into the shadows. Still, the family said little. No major health announcement, no grim countdown, just vague reassurances that he was resting or taking time. But what if those quiet months were part of a plan? A countdown not to recovery, but to closure. The theory that began circulating online was that the family, particularly Sharon, was helping Ozzy manage a private, dignified exit, that every missed concert, every quiet week, was part of a larger decision. Not necessarily euthanasia in the legal sense, but something adjacent, a quiet allowance, a moment of stepping back, away from life support, away from invasive treatment, and into the end Ozzy had always said he wanted. Peaceful on his terms and surrounded by family. And when that moment came on July 22nd, it didn't come with flashing headlines or hospital drama. It came quietly, as if rehearsed. The lights dimmed, the music faded, and the man who once screamed into the void fell completely silent. Ozzy Osbourne's official cause of death has yet to be publicly disclosed. That silence alone has only added fuel to the wildfire of speculation. What we do know is that he passed away in Birmingham, England, his birthplace, surrounded by his family. The Osbournes issued a brief, carefully worded statement that asked for privacy, spoke of love, and expressed grief. But no details were given, not even the basic ones. Not the time of death, not the hospital, not the illness, not even confirmation if he passed away at home. And that's where the mystery deepens. In today's world, when a public figure dies, especially someone as globally iconic as Ozzy Osbourne, there's usually a flood of information within hours. Tributes, yes, but also specifics. He died of heart failure. He passed after a long battle with cancer. Even with celebrities who've kept their illnesses private, there's often some clarity. But with Ozzy, nothing. It felt intentional. And it raised the question, was this vagueness part of a strategy to shield the truth? Or perhaps to honor a choice that couldn't be legally acknowledged? There were whispers, quiet at first, then louder, that Ozzy didn't just die, that he let go, that there was, perhaps, a conversation days before with his family, doctors, and Sharon, that he refused further treatment, that he was, as some put it, ready. The words assisted and dignified began appearing in threads, forums, even soft-voiced YouTube commentaries. Words carefully chosen, dancing around the idea of a planned ending without directly saying it. The media treaded carefully. No major outlet dared speculate, but fans did. They combed through Sharon's old quotes. They replayed that podcast clip. They analyzed Kelly's Instagram denial, and more than a few began asking the same thing. Was this the conclusion of a plan made years ago? A plan that would allow Ozzy to avoid the hospital bed, the indignity of tubes, the erosion of memory? One report claimed he was visited by a non-disclosed medical team days before he passed. Another said a priest had been quietly brought into the home, not for last rites, but for something more peaceful, more modern. These reports remain unconfirmed, but they feed into the same narrative. Ozzy's end wasn't sudden, it was chosen. And in the absence of a clear cause of death, the silence from Sharon speaks volumes. She's never been one to hold back, until now. Her silence feels like a locked door, and behind it may be a truth the world isn't ready for, or perhaps one it already suspects. The most unsettling part of this unfolding story isn't just how Ozzy Osbourne died. It's how calmly Sharon Osbourne has handled everything since. For a woman known for her fire, her brutal honesty, and her refusal to back down from a fight, her reaction has been almost surgical. No press tour, no televised tearful farewell, no dramatic interviews or media blitzes, just a short statement asking for privacy, and then silence. That silence, to many, is not just grief, it's strategy. Over the years, Sharon has built a reputation as both protector and architect of Ozzy's career and image. She was the one who pulled him back from the brink after his darkest spirals. She was the one who took a burned-out, scandal-ridden rocker and turned him into a reality TV icon. She didn't just manage Ozzy, she resurrected him. And perhaps, in the end, she wanted to protect him from one last indignity, dying in public. According to whispers from those close to the family, Sharon began withdrawing from public events several months before Ozzy's death. She declined interviews. She turned down TV appearances. She was, allegedly, spending nearly all her time with Ozzy in Birmingham, ensuring that his final days were filled with familiarity and quiet. One insider suggested she had hired a specialized end-of-life medical consultant, someone who advises families on how to provide comfort care outside of hospitals. Not a hospice nurse, not a doctor, someone in between. That detail, if true, points again to a premeditated choice, a guided goodbye. Not euthanasia in a clinical sense, but the act of slowly letting go, with support, with grace, and most importantly, with consent. Some fans have begun to revisit a 2007 quote from Sharon, one that now feels prophetic. "I believe in euthanasia. If Ozzy or I ever got Alzheimer's, that's it. We'd be off." While Ozzy didn't have Alzheimer's, he had Parkinson's. He had chronic pain. He had surgeries, tremors, confusion. Sharon may have seen the writing on the wall, and instead of letting him be whittled away by time and agony, she may have given him what she believed to be his final gift, dignity. But here's where the conspiracy theories begin. If Ozzy's death was managed, if it was planned, or allowed to happen on his terms, then that could raise legal and ethical questions, especially in a country where assisted suicide is still largely illegal. Is that why Sharon hasn't said more? Is that why no cause of death has been released? Is she protecting her family's privacy or shielding them from fallout? Sharon Osbourne has always been bold, but now her silence might be the boldest move she's ever made. Because if the truth ever came out, if the world learned that Ozzy died not of natural causes, but by quiet design, it would be one of the most shocking endings in rock history. In the hours after Ozzy Osbourne's death was announced, Tributes poured in from all corners of the music world, but something was noticeably off. It wasn't just the lack of detail in the family's statement, it was the tone of the tributes themselves. They weren't surprised, they weren't panicked, they weren't even filled with the usual disbelief that follows a legend's passing. Instead, they were prepared. Paul Stanley of Kiss tweeted a simple, "Rest easy, Ozzy. We knew this was coming." Ice-T posted a nostalgic message that ended with, "He went out the way he wanted." Even the Pixies, known for their cryptic style, wrote, "The curtain was his choice. We respect that." None of them mentioned how he died. None of them asked why. And none of them seemed shocked. That's not normal. Behind the scenes, it's been long speculated that many in Ozzy's inner circle knew something about his decline that the public didn't. He had stopped attending industry events years ago. Recording sessions were postponed indefinitely. Tour managers were quietly let go. Ozzy had, for all intents and purposes, been saying goodbye for a while now. But most fans didn't realize it until the silence became permanent. And then there's Dignitas, the Swiss-assisted suicide clinic Sharon mentioned in the past. In the days after Ozzy's death, reporters attempted to contact the organization to confirm whether Ozzy had ever been a client. Dignitas declined to comment, citing privacy laws. But the fact that journalists even thought to ask was telling, because no other death in recent memory had left so many question marks about its nature. Only this one. Was Ozzy's death the final performance of a man who lived life on his own terms? Or was it a carefully orchestrated decision made behind closed doors, agreed upon by family, sealed in secrecy? Adding to the mystery, no autopsy was announced, no funeral date was made public, no live-streamed memorial. It's almost as if the family wants to close this chapter without letting the world peek inside. But fans, especially those who've followed Ozzy for decades, can feel it in their bones. Something about this doesn't sit right. Not in a malicious way, not in a scandalous way, but in a deeply personal, deliberate way. Because when a man who's cheated death for 50 years finally lets go, maybe it wasn't death that came for Ozzy. Maybe, just maybe, Ozzy came for death and told it, for once, when and where it was allowed to arrive. In the days that followed Ozzy Osbourne's passing, fans gathered outside his childhood home in Birmingham and stood quietly outside the gates of his Los Angeles estate. Candles were lit, guitars leaned against fences, and handwritten notes poured in from all over the world. But while the tributes honored the legend, the lingering question, how exactly did he die, hung over everything like a shadow. And then Sharon Osbourne finally appeared, not in a sit-down interview, not on television, but in a pre-recorded video played at a private industry memorial, where phones were banned and press were excluded. A snippet leaked online within 48 hours. In it, Sharon sat alone in a softly lit room. Her eyes were glassy, her voice steady but low, and what she said has left the world stunned ever since. People will say we were reckless, that we made decisions we shouldn't have. But Ozzy made his choice, and I honored it because I loved him more than I've ever loved anything. The room in the video was quiet. A long pause followed. Then she added, "It wasn't easy. None of it, but Ozzy was tired. And if you knew the man behind the music, behind the madness, you'd understand. He deserved peace. And he got it." That was all she said. No direct confirmation, no admission. But to many, it was the answer they were waiting for. It sent shockwaves through fan communities. Some felt heartbroken, others felt relief, and many felt conflicted. Because if Ozzy Osbourne, the immortal wild man of rock, chose to exit on his own terms, it changes the narrative we've known for decades. This wasn't the tale of a man who was overtaken by illness or broken by time. It was the story of someone who had given every ounce of himself to the world and chose to bow out while he still had control. Since then, fans have begun reinterpreting his lyrics. "See you on the other side. No more tears. Goodbye to romance." They take on new meaning now, like secret messages written years in advance. A farewell letter spread across decades of music. Ozzy Osbourne will forever be remembered for the chaos, the power, the rebellion. But now, in death, he's revealed a final side of himself, one far quieter, far more haunting, and undeniably human. Not a scream, but a whisper. Not an explosion, but a curtain call. And as the world mourns, it also reconsiders what it means to die with dignity. Because in the end, maybe the wildest thing Ozzy ever did was choose when the music would finally stop.